Okay, we regularly, most of you probably know, we pretty regularly sing John chapter number 15. It's one of our sort of favourite songs we sing around here. And in John chapter 15, Jesus says, not that we're there at the minute, but he said, "For without me you can do nothing. For without me ye can do nothing." And then a couple of verses later, he says, "If ye abide in me and my words abide in you, you shall ask what you will, and it shall be done unto you." Now those two verses, they're basically carrying a sort of similar sort of meaning than what we see here in Psalm 127. Because he's saying, look, apart from me, you can't do anything. But if you abide in me, if my words abide in you, hey, you can ask and it's going to be done. And here we can see in Psalm 127, notice it says here, "Except the Lord build the house, they labour in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain." And so that's what it's saying. It's saying, look, you've got a labourer, you've got someone, they're building a city, but if they don't have the Lord's help, then they're building it in vain. The same goes for a watchman. He's staying awake. He's wanting to keep the city safe. He's the watchman. He's on guard. But if the Lord isn't guarding the city, then the watchman's efforts, they're vain. Okay, and the word vain, that basically just means, if something's vain, it means it doesn't produce any result. It's useless, basically, is what it's saying. And so it's important that we keep in mind that we need God's help if we're going to achieve anything worthwhile. Okay? Now, as I say that, I'm not saying that we should therefore just sit back and do nothing. Because the psalm doesn't say that, it doesn't say God's going to build the house and there's no labourer. It doesn't say that God's going to keep the city and there's no watchman. But what it's saying is the watchman by themselves, it's going to be in vain. Or the labourer or the builder by themselves it's not going to achieve what we need it to achieve. And so what we need to realise is we should be building, we should be watching, but we need to do everything we can do to ensure that God is working with us. Okay, so keep your finger in Psalm 127 and look at 1 Corinthians chapter number 3. Finger in Psalm 127, look at 1 Corinthians chapter number 3 and verse number 6. 1 Corinthians chapter number 3 and verse number 6. 1 Corinthians 3:6 says, this is Paul writing, he says, "I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase." Notice he says, look, I planted, I did this, Apollos he watered, he came behind and, furthered on what I'd already done, but God gave the increase. He says, "So then neither is he that planteth anything, neither he that watereth, but God that giveth the increase. Now he that planteth and he that watereth are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labour." So notice, you've got Apollos, you've got Paul, you've got these labourers, they're working, they're planting, they're watering, and God's going to reward them according to their labour. But it's God who gives the increase. Look at verse number 9. He says, "For we are labourers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building." So the thing that's being built is actually people. It's not they're building some sort of physical structure. They're not building some church building or something. He says, "Look, ye are God's building. According to the grace of God, which is given unto me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another buildeth thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if any man build upon this foundation, gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is." So he's saying, look, what's happening is you're building, and it's saying you could be using different sort of materials. Maybe it's gold and silver, precious stones, things that are valuable, or maybe it could be wood or hay or stubble, things that, you don't sort of really think of them as being valuable. But he says, look, every man's work is going to be made manifest, it's going to be revealed. It's going to be showed for what it is. You see, because everyone does stuff in their life. Everyone works in some form or other. But what happens is our work, it's going to be revealed how good it is. That says the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try or test every man's work of what sort it is. So in other words, there's going to come a day when the work that you've done is going to be tested by God. And he's going to look and see, well, is it gold, silver, precious stones, or is it wood, hay, and stubble? And notice it says revealed by fire. What happens if you apply fire to gold? I mean, you melt it. I mean, I think that's what they do, is that they melt gold, and the purpose of that is what? To sort of purify it. You know, they melt it, and then any sort of impurities float to the top, and they sort of scrape them off, something like that. Okay? And that's what you can do with a metal, you know. But what happens if you apply fire to something like wood, or hay, or stubble? What happens if you apply fire to that? It's going to be gone. It's going to burn up. It's going to be gone. And so that's what it's saying here. It says, look, if any man's work abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive reward. So if your work was of a lasting value, you're going to receive a reward for that. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss. But he himself shall be saved, yet so is by fire. So you see, look, if your work abides, if it lasts, if it remains, you get a reward for what you've done. You know, so every time you've gone out and you preach the gospel to someone's got saved, well, guess what? That abides. Because you can never lose your salvation. That's an eternal reward you receive. But say you go and you're spending your time doing something that's of no value whatsoever. Well, guess what? Then there's no reward for that. Okay? And all of us have things in our life that we do that aren't going to necessarily have a reward from God. But notice also it says, look, it says he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so is by fire. So notice it's saying that what work you do, whether it's of lasting value or not, that's got no effect on whether you're saved. You're still saved. Even if everything was just stubble, if everything was just worthless and burnt up, guess what? You would still have salvation. And so what we need to realise is that, look, Paul, Apollos, they were labourers with God. In fact, Paul, he actually said that he laboured more abundantly than the other apostles. Look, if you would, you're there in 1 Corinthians, look at chapter 15. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter number 15 and verse number 10. 1 Corinthians chapter number 15 and verse number 10. Paul says, but by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain, but I laboured more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. So Paul was saying, look, I actually worked harder than the other, because he said he was like the least of the apostles, you know, like as one born out of due time. He says he actually laboured more abundantly than them all. And it's interesting, I mean, you know, half the New Testament's written by Paul. You know, so he was obviously someone who worked really hard. But then he says, look, yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. So in other words, he's saying, it wasn't that I did it in my own strength. Because remember, except the Lord build the house, they labour in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. So that's exactly the same thing that we can see. You know, look back at Psalm 127 again. Look at Psalm 127, and we see the same sort of concept. Verse number 2. It says, it is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. So what we're seeing here, look, rising up early, sitting up late, eating bread of sorrows, this pictures someone who's working really hard. You know, they're sacrificing things. And yet it's vain, it's useless, unless God is in it. Now, the remaining 3 verses in the psalm talk about children and the blessing that they are. But these first 2 verses are not completely separate and unrelated. You see, I mean, look at verse number 1 again. It says, except the Lord build the house, they labour in vain that build it. Now, of course, except the Lord build the house can have multiple meanings. Obviously, the house is a place where you live. But the house also can refer to like your family. You know, it says in... we often use these verses outside. In Acts 16, verse 30, it says, this was with the Philippian jailer, he says, and brought them out and said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? And they said, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. And then it says, and thy house. Now some people wonder, what's that talking about? Well, when it talks about his house, that's referring to his family. Okay, and Paul's not saying, well, if you get saved, therefore that means your family's automatically saved. That's not the way it works. But later on, if we keep reading in the chapter, Paul actually says, and he preached the word to all that were in his house. Yeah. So they believed and they got baptised and so forth, you see. And so, but just, you can see, your house can refer to your family. And so what, building a house, building a family without God, that is labouring in vain. Because you see, having a family, I mean, doesn't it take time? Doesn't it take effort? It takes work. But if it's not the right kind of work, then it's going to be in vain. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, you don't need to turn there, but it tells us basically that children, they're supposed to be brought up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. In fact, if you actually turn to the book of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter number 22, Proverbs chapter number 22 and verse number 6, Proverbs chapter number 22 and verse number 6, Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Train up a child in the way he should go. So the Bible's saying, look, we should train our children. But to train someone, doesn't that take work? Doesn't that take effort? Absolutely it does. Look at Proverbs chapter number 31. Proverbs chapter number 31 and verse number 4. Proverbs 31 verse number 1, excuse me. Proverbs 31 verse 1 says, the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. So what do we see here? Here we see a mother teaching her son. The prophecy that his mother taught him. Look back at Proverbs chapter number 4. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse number 1. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse number 1, it says, hear ye children, the instruction of a father, and attend to no understanding. For I give you good doctrine, forsake ye not my law. For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He taught me also, and said unto me, let thine heart retain my words, keep my commandments and live. So we see the mother teaching a child. We see the father teaching the child. And why? Why is that important? Well, look, see what it says in verse 5. Get wisdom, get understanding, forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, this is wisdom, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. It's really important to learn wisdom. That's why it's so important for mothers and fathers to teach their children. Verse 8 says, exalt her, and she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee to honour when thou dost embrace her. She shall give to thine head an ornament of grace. A crown of glory shall she deliver to thee. So notice, once again, we see rewards. It says, look, an ornament of grace. You're going to be promoted. You're going to have honour. Verse number 10. Hear, O my son, and receive my sayings, and the years of thy life shall be many. I have taught thee in the way of wisdom. I have led thee in right paths. When thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened, and when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. Take fast hold of instruction, let her not go, keep her, for she is thy life. And over and over throughout this whole, throughout the book of Proverbs, you see this repeated again and again. The importance of being taught, the importance of teaching your children. Look at verse number 20. My son, attend to my words, incline thine ear unto my sayings. Let them not depart from thine eyes. Keep them in the midst of thine heart, for they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. So it's important that we understand that we should be teaching. We should be teaching our children. And if you're a child, that means you should be learning. Learn from your mother. Learn from your father. In fact, in the Bible, you actually find the word taught. The word taught occurs nearly 80 times in the Bible. And more than a third of the time it occurs in the Gospels. Taught, over and over. Well, who do you think is the person who's doing the teaching? It's Jesus. Jesus is doing the teaching, and Jesus is our example, so we should follow his steps. Look, if you were at Acts chapter number 1. Acts chapter number 1 and verse number 1. Acts chapter 1 and verse number 1, this is Luke writing. And he says, the former treatise have I made, O Theophilus, of all that Jesus began, both to do and teach. This is what Jesus, what he did and he taught. So he's actually referring back to the former treatise. He's saying, I wrote the book of Luke, and in the book of Luke it recorded what Jesus did and what he taught. And that's what it comes down to. That's what Jesus did. He taught things, and he also did things. He had actions and he had instruction. Because the thing about it is, it can be easy to do one but not the other. Imagine if you just teach your children things, but then you don't set the example. You don't do what's right. Think about maybe a parent who smokes, and they teach your children, don't smoke, and then they're smoking. Well, what's that called? If you teach one thing, you say one thing, but you do something else. It's being a hypocrite if you do that. Okay? But of course, there's the other thing as well. Sometimes what parents will do, parents will do the right thing. They'll teach by example, but they won't actually teach. They won't actually say, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. So you can have an example where parents live a good, godly life. They're doing the right things, and yet their children are going haywire because the parents are never actually correcting them. They're never saying, no, that's not what you should do and this is what you should do. You have to actually instruct them with what is right. So in that case, what you are is, instead of being a hypocrite, you're being negligent. You're not doing the whole job that God is, because God says that we're supposed to teach our children, over and over. But here's the thing. Maybe you are a great example to your children. Maybe you spend time teaching them. But if you aren't doing it in the fear of the Lord, then you're wasting your time. What does it say? It's vain. It's useless. And that's what we see in verse number 1 and 2. We see someone, they're building a house, they're guarding a city, they're rising up early, they're sitting up late, they're denying themselves. But if God's not in it, it's vanity. It's a waste of time. It's useless. Now, that was just by way of introduction. The sermon itself is not going to be very long. I know you say, well, I've heard that before many times, but let's look on at verse Psalm 127. Let's look at the last 3 verses. Psalm 127, verse number 3. It says, "Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate." So the title of the sermon this morning is The Blessing of Children. The Blessing of Children. It says, look, lo, children are an heritage of the Lord. And heritage, what's an heritage? Well, a heritage is basically something that's passed on from one generation to the next. It's a special position, if you like. It's something that's valuable. Look what it says here, the fruit of the womb is his reward. Well, what's a reward? A reward is a good thing, isn't it? If you get a reward, it's like, well, that's great, that's a good thing. So this is telling us, look, children are a blessing. Children are fantastic. Children are great. Now, here's a question, though. Is that what the world thinks? Does the world think that children are a blessing? Now, you might hear those words. I mean, don't people say that, but, oh, they're such a blessing. But what impression does the world really give of children? I mean, a friend of mine who I've sort of see, keeping up with what she does online and whatnot, and she's got quite a few children, and she often offers to give away her kids. She goes on about what trouble they are, what a pain they are, and does anyone want to take these kids? Does anyone want them? They're going free to a good home. Like you might say to about a cat or a dog or something. And yet, often people can have this sort of attitude. I mean, haven't you heard about this thing about the terrible twos? You heard about the terrible twos? It's just talking about how young children get really badly behaved. What about the teenage years? Yeah. Isn't it teenage years? It's like that's when children they're rebellious and they're wild and they do all that and they're just they make me pull my hair out. Isn't that what you hear about? That sort of stuff. They do. I mean, people talk about that sort of stuff. What about this? Children get prescribed drugs by doctors, don't they? Doesn't that happen? Where doctors actually prescribe drugs to children. I mean, in fact, I looked at this up online. According to the CDC.gov, so that's the government website over in the States, the Centers for Disease Control, I think it's called. And there was this thing basically talking about some studies that were done between 2005 and 2010, and they said among children aged 12 to 19. So adolescents, you probably call them, or whatever they are, 6% were using psychotropic drugs. 6%. That's a lot. Don't do the maths, but it's not quite 1 in 10, but it's not too far away from it. Okay? That's a lot of people. 6% are using psychotropic drugs. That's like, antidepressants, or maybe some sort of treatment for ADHD. I think that's like a stimulant is what they call that. There's also this antipsychotics. There's I don't know how you say that one, anxiolytics or sedatives, hypnotics, antimanics. I mean, you name it. There's just all these different sort of pills and potions that they're giving to people. I mean, doesn't it sound like there's a lot of problems with children? If that many of your children are supposed to be being drugged, okay, and what about this? Is this something that's decreasing or is it on the increase? It's on the increase. More and more children are being drugged. And in fact, and you say, well, that's just from the States. I think, from what I gather, I looked up and I saw somewhere else, I think New Zealand's actually worse. New Zealand's one of the most drugged countries in the world, particularly among children. Okay? And there's reasons, we'll get into in a minute, some reasons, stuff for why that would be. But here's the thing. How bad would things have to be before you start drugging your kids? How bad would they have to be before you start giving your kids drugs? I mean, when I was growing up, and I think it's probably still around, was it like that DARE, the DARE program? It's about DARE to keep kids off drugs. It's like the drug and alcohol, whatever it is, some sort of education thing that they, in schools, and they've got the T-shirts. Back in those days, I think it was like black T-shirts with red DARE across it and things like that. And it's about stopping kids taking drugs. Don't take drugs. But hey, your behaviour's not very flash. Have some drugs. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Not only that, though, I mean, did you know there's an increasing number of countries around the world that they've got a low fertility rate? There's a thing they call the total fertility rate. And it's basically the total fertility rate is how many children a woman has within that culture. Now, because obviously you figure you got a population of people. You got a man and a woman. That's 2 people. And guess what? If they have 2 children, then you've kind of replaced yourself. Although I think they say it's supposed to be about like 2.1 or something, because obviously you're going to have people die and infant deaths and stuff like that. So and don't ever reach reproduction age. So what you have is you want to say if every woman has 2.1 children, then that means if we've got this many people in this generation, you'll have exactly the same number of people in the next generation. So 2.1, that's kind of the number. Now here's the thing. So you've got to have a stable population, you need 2.1, and that's, as I say, that's only including infant mortality. That doesn't include things like wars or disease or famines or things which would wipe out lots of people. Okay? Well, guess what? Most Western countries have a total fertility rate of less than 2. So if you need 2.1 to stay the same, guess what? If you go less than that, what's going to happen? The population is going to go down. Okay? In fact, New Zealand, the total fertility rate in New Zealand is 1.9. 1.9. Some countries are as low as 1.2. 1.2. You figure out, I mean, 1.2 is not far away from 1. So figure that way. If you've got, 2 people, they have 1 child, well, guess what? So if you had a population of 16, they would have 8 kids. And that population of 8 would have 4, and then 2, and then 1. Oops. And then what comes after that? 0. Okay? And so there are, and without going off into some whole other story, but within Western cultures, that's a big thing. And that's why people talk about the dangers of places like Europe becoming Muslim. Why? Because they have immigrants come in, and guess what? By and large, Muslims, they have a lot more children than average. And so what happens if the indigenous people that are there and throughout Europe are having hardly any children, like Germany, for example, that's a place that's got very low total fertility rate, but there's plenty of Muslim immigrants and they're having lots of kids. So within a short period of time, suddenly there's going to be more Muslims than there's non-Muslims. All of a sudden, what's going to happen? The government's going to be Muslim. The laws will be Muslim. Okay, that's what's going to happen. Okay, but that's kind of another story. But here's the thing, though. If people around the world are having less children, and if they're increasingly drugging the kids that they do have, doesn't it sound like children are not necessarily really seen as a blessing? If you're drugging your kids, if you're not even bothering to have kids, But in contrast to that, the thing is, God says that children are a source of joy. Children are a source of joy. You look at Psalm number 27. Look, it says, "Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them." And this is referring to children. You see, look, they're like arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. So it's not saying literally a quiver full of arrows. It's saying a house full of children. That's what it's talking about. And so God says it's actually a blessing, And although having said that, provided they're wise. Remember what we sang just before, Proverbs 23? Have a look there at Proverbs chapter number 23. Look at Proverbs 23 and verse number 24. Proverbs chapter number 23 and verse number 24. Proverbs 23:24 says, "The father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy of him. Thy father and thy mother shall be glad, and she that bare thee shall rejoice." So guess what? If they're wise children, that's going to make their parents happy. They're going to bring them great joy. But of course, how many people give birth to wise children? Anyone give birth to wise children? No one does. Why? Because children are born foolish. They're born foolish. Look at Proverbs chapter number 22. Proverbs chapter number 22 and verse number 15. Proverbs 22 verse 15 says, "Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child." Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. Children come foolish. And then it says, "But the rod of correction shall drive it far from him." So children are born foolish. They need to be corrected. Look at Proverbs chapter number 19. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse number 18. Proverbs 19:18. It says, "Chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying." Chasten thy son while there is hope. Chasten refers to discipline. It refers to spanking your children, correcting your children. Look at Proverbs chapter number 29. Proverbs chapter number 29 and verse number 17. Proverbs chapter 29 verse 17 says, "Correct thy son, and he shall give thee rest. Yea, he shall give delight unto thy soul." So does every child give delight? Well, if they're not corrected, then they're not going to give delight. Okay? And they're going to make you tear your hair out and make you think, well, maybe anyone want to take them off my hands? Anyone want to give them away? But that's the thing, you see, the Bible says, look, if you correct your children, if you spank your children, if you discipline them, then they'll bring you joy. Why? Because they'll be wise and not foolish. But of course the world has got a different idea. What does the world say about spanking? In New Zealand, it's against the law. It's illegal to spank your children. You know? The other countries aren't necessarily like that. I think Australia's not there yet, but they probably won't be that far away. I think same in the United States. But there's a lot of countries, and it's increasing, the number of countries where it's illegal to spank your children. So you can't spank your children. Well, I mean, the Bible says we should obey God rather than man. So legally, you're not supposed to spank your children. But the thing about it is, at the same time, people don't want to have children. And the ones that they do have, they drug them. So, so it doesn't really sound like they're this great joyful blessing. Now, my children, they're a blessing. They bring me joy. They bring me and my wife joy. I'm glad we have the children we have. The more children, the better. But of course, if children are foolish, if children are just bringing nothing but grief and shame, why would you want to have them? One, that'd be all you can handle. Two, that's it. I've only got two hands, one for each hand. But I mean, and here's the thing. You see, if you've got the world saying one thing and God saying the other thing, it's pretty obvious which we should go with. I mean, another chapter we often sing is Romans chapter number 12. Romans chapter number 12, in Romans chapter 12 verse 1, it says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And then it says, and be not conformed to this world. That means don't be like the world. So like if the world is going down this way, you should be going down a different way. Be not conformed to this world. The world's drugging their children. That's not the way to go. The world is not having many children. That's not the way to go. It says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. That means changed. By the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. To be transformed by renewing your mind. And of course, the place we renew our minds is in the Scriptures. The Bible talks about, cleansing with the washing of water by the Word. We need to renew our minds. We need to change what we think so that we can know what's good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, we need to realise, that the same world which says spanking children damages them, that's the same world that actually says, well, actually, no, it's also fine to abort them before they're born. Same to kill them. It's fine to kill them. So, you've actually got a child whose behaviour you can correct. You can set them on the right path, wrong path, by spanking them, disciplining them, chastening them, as the Bible says. And the world says, no, that's wrong. But before that child is born, when it's still in its mother's womb, you can rip the child to bits. You can kill it. That is what the world says. I mean, not only that, I mean, they don't even have, there's a lot of children who actually die because of birth control. Because how is it that you think that why is it that so few people are having children? Now, obviously, some people, they just don't get married, they never want to have children, full stop, or whatever. But I mean, a lot of it's because people will only have a few children. Or they'll delay having children. Okay? Now, how is it that they're delaying? The major way that they're delaying is through birth control. So they're still doing what husbands and wives, what men and women do. They're still doing that, but somehow they're not having children because what they're doing is they're using something called birth control. And the thing about birth control is birth control. It's not conception control. Okay, that's the thing, because abortion is a form of birth control. It stops a child from being born. Okay? And of course, these people take these pills. And what these pills really are, they've got different ways of working. They've got different means of preventing a child being born. One way is to stop the woman from ovulating, so to stop her from releasing eggs. That's one of the things that they do. But they do more than that. They've got multiple mechanisms. Because sometimes, even in spite of taking birth control pills, a woman still releases eggs. It happens all the time. I think it's called breakthrough ovulation. It still happens. So they have other means where they have, and one of the things they do is that it actually makes the womb a hostile environment, which basically means that if conception does happen, the sperm and the egg, they meet, and you've got a new life form, you've got the cells are multiplying, you've got a baby growing, and it's travelling down the fallopian tube, but when it arrives in the place it's supposed to implant, because the birth control pill, what's happened is it finds a hostile environment, it can't implant. And so what happens, it's what they call it a silent abortion. It's very early stages. But guess what? A child has just been killed. That's exactly what's happened. Okay? And understand, you might say, but I don't think that doesn't sound right. Where are you getting information from? Well, you need to realise, this information, it's readily available. You know, the birth control pills, they come with information about the ingredients, and you can look up and see, what do these things do? You might have heard of people taking a morning after pill. A morning after pill, in other words, that's when someone's done something that they shouldn't have been doing. You know, unmarried people, and so they take a pill the day after. You know, well, you can tell clearly that it's like something's already happened. But a morning after pill, all they really are is higher dose versions of regular birth control pills. That's all they are, because they're doing the same thing. You see, because the world gives you, we need to understand, the world gives us distorted information. You know, people think, if I just do a Google search, and then I'll know the truth. It's all there on a Google search. You know, if I look it up. But you need to realise Google has an agenda. They show you some things and they don't show you other things. Did you know that? If you went and looked up on YouTube, for example, which is, guess what, that's owned by Google. If you looked up on YouTube and you looked up abortion, do you know what you're not going to find at the top? But what's supposed to happen, according to their algorithms, what's supposed to be at the top are the most popular ones. The videos that have been viewed the most, they show up at the top, because you're looking for something, it's purely supposed to be based on what's popular. But guess what? If you searched on YouTube for abortion, some of the most popular videos are from pro-life organisations. They're exposing the horrors of abortion and the wickedness of it. But guess what? They don't show up on the first page. No. Because Google, they go in and they have their algorithms, but they also adjust things and they shove things down. Yeah. And it's, but some of them have got graphic images. Some of them have got graphic images. And hey, but there's plenty of other things with graphic images that show up fine. Yeah. But hey, they'll even downgrade someone with just no graphic images, just someone giving their testimony about being, how they were forced to have an abortion and how much they regret it. Yeah. Somehow or other, that's way down. Yeah. Why? It's because they've got an agenda, And that's the thing, if you get your news from Google, if you get your news, God forbid, from Facebook, guess what? They've got an agenda. And they control what you see, and they control what you don't see. And guess what? It's distorted. So on the one hand, we have the world says that children are a blessing, but at the same time, it says they're just so much trouble, even a burden on the planet, that we shouldn't even have that many of them. Isn't that what they say? But in contrast to that, what does God say? He really means it. He says, happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. When God says children are a blessing, he means it. When the world says children are a blessing, well, it's kind of they're speaking through both sides of their mouth. God says the fruit of the womb is his reward. Now understand, just as a disclaimer, that doesn't mean that if you don't have children, that God is punishing you. That's not what it's saying at all. You can look in the Bible, you can find examples of very godly people. Think about Abraham and Sarah. Aren't they lifted up? Abraham is the father of the faith. Sarah is providing you with a King James Bible, she's lifted up as being a woman of great faith. But did they have a lot of children? No. They had Isaac. Yes. That was the only child that Abraham and Sarah had together was Isaac. That's the only one. Well, Isaac. Isaac was a godly, he's one of the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Well, guess what? How many children did Isaac have? 2. Jacob and Esau. That's all he had. So Abraham and Sarah had 1. Isaac had 2. So it's not saying that, that you've got to have lots of children to somehow be blessed by God. No, look, you can find plenty of examples of people who had anyone heard of King Ahab? Was he a good guy? He was a wicked king, wasn't he? Wicked king. Well, guess what? He had 70 sons. 70 sons. I'm picking he had more than one wife or concubine or whatever else. But Ahab, he had 70 sons. Oh, he's blessed by God. No, not at all. So whether you've got few children or whether you have no children at all, that doesn't mean that, hey, you're not being blessed by God. And you might have heaps of children, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you are being blessed by God either. Some solo mother that's out there sleeping around with every man, Tom, Dick and Harry, that's not being blessed by God. She's just behaving like a rabbit or something like that. Yes. So here's the thing. If you listen to the world, you'll have a wrong view of children. They're a burden, don't have too many of them. But now look at the end of verse number 4. Look at the end of verse number 4. It says, so are children of the youth. So are children of the youth. You see, because that's one of the things. I mean, sure they're a blessing, but you want to do other things first. You want to get your career sorted out. Get yourself a house. Do these different things you've got to do first, and then later is when you have children. But God says, look, as arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. So according to the Bible, should we wait until we're in our 30s before we're having our children? Now, if you're not married, absolutely, wait before you have children. But there's really no reason to delay having a family. I mean, one of the reasons why the world promotes delaying having children is because it's just another way of reducing the number of children that people have. That's the whole point. If you delay, because the older you get, the less fertile, the harder it becomes to have children. Okay? It's great to get married. It's great to have children early. I mean, one of the things about having children, it actually helps you grow up. When you have children, it actually helps you grow up. I remember and my wife and I, we had sort of an unusual story where we had a child first, as in we actually adopted someone. We adopted a child before we got married. And when we adopted this child, so you suddenly become an instant parent. All of a sudden you're the parent of a 6-year-old. Okay? And so what had happened, we'd bought a house, and I was supposed to be doing it up. I mean, the handyman. That's a bit of a joke, okay, but I was supposed to be doing up this house, but I've been there for a few months and nothing had really happened at that stage, I don't think. But anyway, they needed a home for this boy, and so we said, yeah, sure, we'll adopt him, and they said, he's yours. So I moved out of the house, and then Maureen moved into the house with the wee boy, and so then we organised to get married, and so over the intervening months I lived somewhere else and would come there for meals during the day and so forth. And but because I became an instant father to a 6-year-old. Well, growing up I wasn't good when it comes to eating veggies. I don't know, maybe because I was the youngest. My parents had sort of given up by then or whatever, but they didn't they didn't make me eat my veggies when I was young. Interesting, I'm the shortest of my brothers. They ate their veggies and I didn't, and I'm short and they're not. Well, they're not massive giants or anything, but they're bigger than me. But here's the thing. As soon as I had a son, do you know what happened for meals? I ate my veggies. Yeah. Because I knew you're supposed to eat your veggies because it's good for you. Yeah. And so instantly, although I didn't do it for myself, because I had a son, I started eating veggies, the ones I don't like. I still don't like all veggies, but I'm a lot better than I was. But here's the thing. It helps you grow up. It helps you grow up. And the thing is, when you listen to God's counsel rather than the world's counsel, you're going to be blessed. There's blessings that come from that. Look at, don't need to turn there, but Psalm number 1 says, Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season, his leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. Look, being counselled by God versus the world, it's a blessing. You're there in Psalm 127, look at Psalm 128. Blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord, that walketh in his ways, for thou shalt eat the labour of thine hands. Happy shalt thou be, and it shall be well with thee. Thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by the sides of thine house. Thy children like olive plants round about thy table. Behold, that thus shall the man be blessed that feareth the Lord. Notice, children are a blessing, having a whole pile of them around your table. The Lord shall bless thee out of Zion, and thou shalt see the good of Jerusalem all the days of thy life. Yea, thou shalt see thy children's children, and peace upon Israel. So what we've seen so far, we've seen we need to be building, we need to be labouring, whatever we're doing, with God, or else it's going to be vain and useless. We've also seen children, they're a blessing from God. Children are a very good thing. But now look at the start of verse number 4, and look at these two things, these 2 points coming together. Look at verse number 4 of Psalm 127. It says, As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. You see, children are likened unto arrows. Think about an arrow. An arrow, that implies, what do you do with an arrow? You point it somewhere. You shoot it somewhere. Okay? And so that's talking about you've got direction. You've got purpose. Well, good. Just as we should be labourers together with God, if we don't want our labour to be in vain, our child rearing should have the purpose of helping our children be the best they can be. Yeah. That's the purpose. You want your children to be the best they can be. But just like an arrow, it's important where they're pointing. It's important where they're pointing. That's why it's so important to teach your children. You know, Isaiah 38:19 says, the father to the children shall make known thy truth. You know, don't need to turn it, but Deuteronomy chapter number 6 talks about, in fact, actually, no, we do have time. Deuteronomy chapter number 6. Deuteronomy chapter number 6. Look at verse number 1. Deuteronomy 6:1 says, look, now these are the commandments, the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that you might do them in the land whither you go to possess it. That thou mightest fear the Lord thy God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments which I command thee, thou, look at this, and thy son, and thy son's son, all the days of thy life, that thy days may be prolonged. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with thee, and that you may increase mightily, as the Lord God of thy fathers hath promised thee, in the land that floweth with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might, and these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them. Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontets between thine eyes. And you turn a bit in Deuteronomy chapter number 11, it talks about the same sort of thing, and it says how that your days will be like the days of heaven upon earth. That's what it's going to be like. We need to realise God has given us our children just for a short time. Before too long, they're going to be ready to leave the nest. You know, they're going to fly out of the world. They're going to be like an arrow going out of a bow. Here's the question though. Will they be a force for good, or will they be a force for bad? Will they be labouring with God, or will they waste their lives with self-centeredness? You know, destructive behaviour. You might say, well, but I don't have children, you know, so none of this applies to me. Well, maybe you're not married, you know, maybe you're past the age for child rearing, but you can have spiritual children. You can have spiritual children. Look, if you were to Galatians chapter number 4, Galatians chapter number 4, in the New Testament, Galatians chapter number 4, and verse number 19. Galatians chapter number 4, actually while you're turning there, I'll just read Philemon 1:10 says, I beseech thee for my son Onesimus, whom I've begotten in my bonds. So notice this, Paul called Onesimus his son. He said he'd begotten him in his bonds. He gave birth to him. Well, he's talking about how he got saved. He preached the gospel to him. 1 Corinthians 4:15 says, for though you have 10,000 instructors in Christ, yet have ye not many fathers. For in Christ Jesus I have begotten you through the gospel. I have begotten you through the gospel. You're there in Galatians chapter number 4. Look at Galatians chapter number 4 and verse number 19. Galatians chapter 4 and verse number 19. He says, my little children, of whom I travail in birth again, until Christ be formed in you. I desire to be present with you now, just change my voice, for I stand in doubt of you. You see, Paul calls the Galatians his children, and because he doubts their salvation, why? Because they were talking about trusting in the works of the law. So he says he's prepared to travail in birth again. Now, it's not talking about them getting saved again. He's saying, I'm not sure you're really saved, so let's just make sure you're actually saved. Because you only get born once. You only get born once. And so that's the thing. As with physical children, it's the same with spiritual children. They're a blessing. They bring joy. And the more you have, the greater the blessing. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. Psalm 113 verse 9 says, the Lord maketh the barren woman to keep house and to be a joyful mother of children. Turn back to Psalm 127 as we finish up. Psalm number 127. While you do, I'll just read from Proverbs 21 verse 30. Proverbs 21 verse 30 says, there is no wisdom nor understanding nor counsel against the Lord. It says, the horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. In other words, hey, you've got a horse, you're going to fight in the battle with a horse, that's great. But safety, it's not from the horse, it's from the Lord. You're there in Psalm 127, it says, look, except the Lord build the house, they labour in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Whatever we're working at, whether we're building, what we're labouring for, if God's not in it, it's going to be in vain. This is clearly seen in raising children. You know, children, they're a blessing from God. Having a lot of children is a great thing. if you bring them up in the nurturing admonition of the Lord. But having lots of children who don't follow God, what's that asking for? That's asking for heartache. That's asking for sorrow. The Apostle John, actually, I said that was last place, 3 John. The Apostle John, he writes, and he says in 3 John chapter number 1, verse number 4, 3 John chapter number 1, verse number 4, he says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Whether it's physical children or whether it's spiritual children, it brings joy to the parents when they're growing, when they're flourishing. See what did it say in Psalm 128? Blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord, that walketh in his ways, for thou shalt eat the labour of thine hands. Happy shalt thou be, and it shall be well with thee. Thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by the sides of thine house, and thy children like olive plants round about thy table. Ask yourself this question. Do my children, do they bring delight to me? Do they bring delight to others? But especially, do they bring delight to God? Let's pray. Gracious Lord, we thank you for your word, and Lord, we thank you for the blessing of children. I'm thankful for all 6 of my children. And Lord, I just pray that you would bless them. Lord, I pray that you would help us to be fruitful people. That we would, as your word says in many places, in the book of Genesis, you told Adam and Eve, you told Noah, you told Jacob, be fruitful, multiply. And Lord, we also pray that, as well as physical children, that we would multiply with spiritual children. Lord, help us to be fruitful. Help us to bear fruit. To preach the gospel, to see souls saved, and to make a difference for good. We thank you and praise you and love you. In Jesus' precious name, amen.